What's up, everybody? How we doing? Happy Labor Day, everybody. At least if you're in North America, it's Labor Day. I don't know about Europe. I don't know about South America. I don't know about Africa. I don't know about Australia, but I know in North America, it's Labor Day, aka the most depressing day of the year. Get those antidepressants out, baby. Summer is officially over, which means we are moving into the fall. I actually really like September. Um, I like September a lot more than January, that's for sure. But I kind of like a little bit of the sweet sorrow that comes with September. Also, September is usually really beautiful, really warm still. But it's September 2nd. It's Labor Day at the time of this recording. It feels like we're turning over a new leaf. So happy Labor Day, everyone. Here we go. Thank you for joining me, everybody, here on today's YouTube Live. Again, we do these lives every Monday, Friday, 12 p.m. Pacific time until my podcast comes out. My podcast is going to be coming out sometime in November. I don't know when in November. But at that point, I think I'm going to do one live a week, and then I'm going to have one podcast episode a week. So we're going to do these double YouTube lives every week for the next 2.5 months. And then we'll bring it down to one when the podcast comes out. But I appreciate you guys tuning in, watching these lives, whether you're watching it live, watching the recording. Really, really appreciate you guys giving a shit what I have to say. It means a lot to me. And so if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. If you guys are able to like this video, be greatly, greatly appreciated. So if you guys are tuning into this live, let me know if you're here. You can comment in the chat there. Let me know your name, where you're tuning in from. I would love to hear where you guys are tuning in from the world. If you guys are watching this live, and if you're watching the recording, you can comment and down below the video as well. So like I said, and I have said many times, eventually this is going to be more of a discussion as my channel sort of builds and grows, as opposed to it being more sort of like an individual monologue, which it is right now, which is fine. I like talking, but eventually it's going to be a discussion where you guys can kind of post your questions in the chat. Let me know kind of what you're curious about, what's kind of alive in your space. We'll get there. So if you guys are watching live, would love to hear your name, where you're tuning in from. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat section. So today we're talking about attachment ruptures. We're talking about attachment ruptures. And we're going to start off with this because I feel it's really, really important. This is what I teach a lot of my work. If you're someone who has done my Ravish container, then you'll be really, really familiar with this idea where an attachment rupture is really, really necessary to reorient to God and the divine, to move more onto sort of the God timeline, right? So an attachment rupture, and the areas that we're going to kind of look at and explore is we have a familial attachment rupture, which essentially is breaking up with your parents. But more importantly, it is about breaking up with the identity, with what I call the core survivalist identity, to how you found belonging, how you found worthiness, how you found love, how you found a sense of having your needs met in the family of origin, right? So attachment rupture is like a familiar rupture, right? The other one is an ancestral rupture, right? Which is an ancestral rupture is you're breaking up with the ancestors of origin, right? And so, and then the final one is a relational rupture, which is a primary romantic relationship that there's a big rupture that happens in this relationship. Whether it's you break up completely with a relationship that you thought was going to be your everything. That was like, I thought this person was the one. Or it's you get to a point in a relationship where you realize that the identities that you're both holding on to, that the paradigm and the way in which this relationship had been constructed, that this iteration of that relationship can't go any further, right? I think there's that quote where we're talking about, being in a relationship or really loving someone is constantly grieving the person that they used to be. And so that's very much at like a micro level that we're going to be shifting so much in a relationship. But the type of rupture we're talking about is like a full-on breakup, or let's call it like a conscious separation, where we realize there's a lot of sort of codependency that's been created in this relationship. and that we have to individually begin to work with our sort of codependent patterns, our sort of codependent tendencies to move more into sort of our individual sovereignty so we can come back together and create a new iteration of our relationship. And so you might be asking, okay, Jamie, like why? First off, let's actually talk about like what is an attachment rupture? Like what's actually happening? And so the best way we can kind of start off by explaining this is an attachment rupture is replicating that something happened in the pre-verbal years. So when I say pre-verbal years, something that happened from 0 to 9 months in the womb, then something that happened from birth to about the age of 3. That's what we would call the pre-verbal years, right? Our attachment wiring, our attachment system is beginning to be formed when we're in the womb, which is so much around what was the emotional situation in the home that we were being incubated in, what was sort of happening in the relationship between mom and dad, what was sort of the environment, the level of stress that mom was dealing with when she was pregnant with us, what was the amount of stress or anxiety that she might have been under. So it really begins to be formed in the womb, right? And then obviously when we're born, the early years is we are essentially, we learn to co-regulate with mom and dad. We learn where is the world a safe place, which is so much of, how non-verbally we begin to co-regulate with mom and dad. We see the face of mom and dad, the eye-to-eye contact that we're like, oh, like, I can cry and have my needs met. This is all pre-verbal. This is before we have any sort of conscious memory, but it's all infusing into ourselves, right? It's infusing into our body. It's the earliest sort of imprint of how our nervous system is formed. It's the earliest imprint of, is intimacy safe? Is intimacy consistent? Is intimacy something that we can rely on? We're forming the earliest imprint of our capacity for connection. Is connection something that can be consistent? Is connection something that we can rely on? So in those pre-verbal years, and you guys have all heard the different attachment types, anxious, avoidant, disorganized attachment, all these different types, is formed in that earliest non-verbal imprint with mom and dad, right? And so much of that is in the face, right? In the eye, specifically the nonverbal eye-to-eye communication with mom and dad. So that's why when you see, say, someone that's really stoic, where you can't read what's happening in their face, that's probably going back to the pre-verbal years, in that revealing their expression wasn't safe. So when we have a really stoic face, when we're really shut down, when you can't really tell what's happening emotionally in the face, it goes back to when we were in our pre-verbal years, that it wouldn't be safe for us to reveal what was happening on our face, right? Either that our needs weren't met or our needs were inconsistently met. And so much of really opening our expression on our face is really actually about healing our attachment wounding, our attachment wiring, right? So you think of someone where we can really see what's happening in their face. That really lends itself to someone that's probably gonna have more of a secure attachment. That it's okay to show what's on your face, because in the earliest imprint from when you're in the womb, 0 to 9 months in the womb, and 0 to 3 years old when you're outside the womb, that your needs would be met consistently, and that intimacy and connection was fostered and nurtured in the system, right? So you can even think of someone who's, more anxious or avoidant or disorganized, is that they're probably going to conceal a lot more of what's happening in their face, because they, again, learned that connection wasn't safe, that it wasn't consistent, that it wasn't something that we can rely on. So when we talk about an attachment rupture, what we're having to talk about is like, what is attachment, right? And so the two areas where attachment is going to come out the strongest in our life is through familial and relational, right? You know how it's like with your friends, it's just not the same because you're not bonded in the same way. And so the areas where attachment is going to be the strongest is in how you connect to the family of origin and how you connect to your primary romantic relationships. But also we want to throw in the mix the sort of ancestors of origin and the ancestral imprint. which when I say the ancestral imprint, it's kind of, I'm talking about the ancestral nervous system. I'm talking about that basically our ancestors and the nervous systems of our ancestors, the capacity that our ancestors had for joy, the capacity that our ancestors had for expression, the capacity that our ancestors had to step into their power is basically going to be inherited and passed down as sort of like this blueprint into our nervous system, right? Which is why moving into our power is so challenging, right? Which is why we come up to these upper limits and upper levels. A lot of that is an inherited blueprint, an inherited nervous system that was passed down from our ancestors of origin that now lives in our body, right? But also what's going to participate in that is what the situation was when we were in the womb and when we were in the earliest years of infancy, right? So all of this sort of compounds together, right? And then obviously this is going to be further nurtured by the identity that we learn to relate to our family. You know what I mean? Whether it's an overfunctioner or an underfunctioner, that you're the strong one, or you're sort of the good girl, or you're the good boy, or you're the martyr. You know, we kind of have these different identities that we take on, and this becomes nurtured. This becomes nurtured. And this sort of further encapsulates, further imprints our nervous system and sort of a specific sort of imprint, right? So all this is related and basically sort of creating the background sort of blueprint of our attachment, right? Of our attachment. And so if we're going to talk about an attachment rupture, really what that means is there's a big disruption. There's a big disruption to the attachment system that we have created. One, with the identity that we learn to belong to the family of origin. Two, with a primary romantic relationship that we extorted a lot of security, that we extorted a lot of stability from, and also a way that we relate to our ancestors, right? A way that we live in sort of these unconscious loyalties to the ancestors. And so one thing that I've learned through my own personal experience, through working with so many different types of people through this process of moving into the energetics of the divine, moving to the energetics of God, is that we really need to experience a significant attachment rupture in order to reorient to God and the divine. And so when I say reorient to God and the divine, what this really, really means is that your attachment system is moving beyond the imprint of your attachment wiring to your primary caregivers. So what that means is that when you're in the womb and in those earliest years, in those pre-verbal years, that the imprint, which means the wiring and bonding to a sense of safety and security in the world, now moves beyond the primary caregivers to that of God and the divine, right? And so typically, this attachment wiring is basically sort of the container that encapsulates our being, right? You want to think of like a container of like, it's kind of a container of fear. I mean, if I move beyond or outside the lines of this attachment imprint in my system, then all this terror and all this fear is going to show up in my body. And basically what's happening is at a cellular somatic level in the tissue of our body, in our nervous system, we're accessing the edge. We're accessing the edge of that bonding that occurred with the primary caregivers, right? And so, like, think about it, even just when you go through a big breakup in a relationship, like you go through a divorce or you go through this sort of breakup with someone who was like such a great source of stability and security. Like, think about how much you're in a relationship and how much that person that you're with and the container that you have, the home that you have, becomes sort of this beacon of safety in the world. And if that were to be disrupted, you'd be like, I wouldn't know what to do. It's almost like life wouldn't make sense because you would move into this space that was the complete unknown, and your entire conscious reality had been formulated around that person and that relationship. What happens with most people, like think about the amount of couples that stay together simply for stability and security, right? They stay together in the kind of confines of their conscious reality is essentially co-regulated by that relationship. And if that relationship weren't to work, they wouldn't be able to function in the world, right? The amount of even relationships where maybe they're not connected, maybe, it's not even the right relationship, so many aspects are not fulfilled in that relationship, but they would never actually leave, right? Think about like couples who are together who maybe is not a great relationship, but that no one would ever break up with the other person, that they would always just find a way to stay together. So much of that is because of that container of attachment wiring, right? It's because of that container of attachment wiring. Really what that means is that we've never really encountered the deepest fear and terror in the body. And if we haven't really somatically processed this attachment in the body, we're never really going to be able to align to God and the divine, right? We're never really going to be able to align to God and the divine because we're essentially going to stay within the confines of that trauma, right? Think about the amount of people that go through maybe a big rupture, maybe a big relationship doesn't work out, and now we kind of move into like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen, and then how quickly people get into other relationships, how quickly people begin to date again. Essentially, kind of what that means is that we're coming up to kind of the vast abyss of the unknown, and we're kind of like, oh shit, right? And it's a much easier path just to go find another relationship, go find another safe container, another sort of safe haven. Because as you move out into sort of that abyss after a really, really big rupture, what's happening is you're beginning to access the deepest core fear and terror in the body. So really what I mean is this rupture. And so when you experience a really big rupture relationally, what it means is your body's going to be re-experiencing the same break in connection to some sort of somatic level of what occurred in early infancy or in the womb, right? So what would happen would be, for example, say you were in the womb and your mom was going through a lot of different anxieties. There's very likely going to be some sort of paired bonding and enmeshment that is created with mom, right? Some real that you're going to be bonded and paired and enmeshed to her in sort of a certain way, right? Which means that when you experience sort of a relational attachment rupture, you're essentially going to be re-experiencing probably some element of the chaos, some element of the unknown of what you would have felt at certain times when you're in the womb. That, oh, the universe isn't a safe place, and kind of the coping mechanism that usually happens with the embryo that's being created is that we're going to pair and bond and enmesh to mom as a way to try to deal with the amount of terror that we might be experiencing and being imprinted into us, right? And so when we experience a relational attachment rupture, the body's going through some experience of replicating the breaks in connection that we would have experienced in early infancy. This is why it's really confusing, because your body is accessing so much like dense fear and terror, and you don't like have a memory for what's going on. It just feels really heavy and dense, and it feels like you're moving into a space of you don't know what's happening. You're moving to such a space of the unknown that everything you sort of use to construct reality is now dissolving. And you think it's sort of the end. We're like, it's this big visceral sort of death. And what we're experiencing is, think about when you were a baby, and for example, say you had to cry it out, that you didn't have, whether it be a babysitter, a nanny, or a primary caregiver to come to your sort of aid to co-regulate with you. So you were crying as a baby, which is going to create, let's say it's going to create a ton of imprinted trauma in the chest, in the throat, and the face, right? So think about, you're a baby, you're crying out, you're screaming. Think about a baby is like their throat chakra. It's like all here. They're in absolute terror. So it's really here and here that trauma gets imprinted in the jaw, in the inner ears, in the eyes. And so now it creates a lot of stuck energy in the throat, the chest, the face. It creates a lot of stuck energy. And so when relationally you're experiencing a disruption or a big break, right? A big rupture. What happening is now the body is accessing that tear from early infancy in the body, right? And what usually happens is that we don't fully move the tear and fear through our body that most people usually find another relationship really quickly. They usually find a similar patterned relationship. They get back together with the person rather than being, okay, now as I'm experiencing this break or this rupture, my body is trying to move and process the fear and terror that was stuck in my system from those pre-verbal years. So now my attachment system can expand beyond the primary caregivers. This is what happens in an attachment rupture. An attachment rupture is the precursor for the system reorienting to God and the divine. It's very much related to the chest, to the throat, to the face, right? So this rupture is accessing a lot of trauma in the face, right? It's basically the ways in which we didn't feel sort of safe to create a sense of intimacy with ourselves. If you think about it, like when you're like a little baby or in the pre-verbal years, the way that you connect to yourself is through co-regulation, right? So you co-regulate with mom and dad. Through the co-regulation and the attachment bonding, the world is a safe place. The world is a safe place. Now, as you co-regulate with mom and dad, you meet yourself more deeply. But when there's a break in connection, or you learn the revelation as a little baby that that experience is not safe, now it becomes a break in connection with yourself. A way that I'm going to shut down or compartmentalize some aspect of myself and my expression, which creates this stored, stuck trauma in our system that now in this rupture is beginning to be accessed, right? Beginning to be accessed. So much of our attachment wiring is also how we formulate our experience of the world and the universe. So, a question to ask yourself is, the universe is the universe an inherently safe, magical place that is serving me with an inherent possibility? So much of that answer comes from the security or lack of security in the attachment bonding that happened with the primary caregivers. Our earliest imprinted pre-verbal memories with connection with mom and dad are formulating our connection to the universe, whether being a dangerous place or a safe place. It's also formulating our earliest memories of, as a woman, our relationship to the masculine, and as a man, our relationship to the feminine. This is where, because so much of that is our relationship to the universe. And so in this rupture, what's happening is we're having to reconstruct our relationship to the universe. And we're having to become our own anchored point in our system through healing the attachment wounding that we experience with mom and dad by allowing it to digest and move through our body. But again, what happens is most people don't allow this process to happen. This is where the divine really, really occurs, right? Most people never really come into the full embodiment of their spiritual gifts, their full power, because they don't allow the totality of this process. Think about someone who goes through a marriage for 20 years and they immediately break up and they're starting to date again. They find someone else. Rather than being like, why don't I walk with God here for a little bit and really feel the world on my own? And so going through an attachment rupture, it requires us to feel what it feels like to be in the world all on our own energy, right? All on our own energy. Think about you experience a really, really devastating breakup, right? A really devastating breakup with essentially you thought someone was the one, or you were like this relationship and you were kind of throwing a curveball. Maybe you felt like you had the foundation or the rug pulled out from underneath you. That's going to elicit these earliest pre-verbal experiences in the body. And most often when that comes up, that we can't really be with that process. It's too terrifying. There's too much fear and terror, right? We have massive experience of loneliness, of isolation, of feeling like we're all alone, kind of on our own island, which When you feel like you're really sort of on your own island, what's actually happening is your body's reacclimatizing to a new attachment imprint. What this really means is you're reorienting how you view the universe, and you're reestablishing your attachment system. In my work, I call this the God attachment system, which really means when you experience a really big relationship attachment rupture, you need to really experience the world on your own for a little while. And when I say experience the world on your own for a while, what I mean is move into energetic sovereignty, right? Think about what happens when we experience a big rupture. We usually are going to have a hard time enforcing our external boundaries and our internal boundaries. This is where the inner love addict comes up a lot. The way that you actually heal the inner love addict is that you experience a really big attachment rupture. Means the pre-verbal terror and fear of the breaks in connection with the primary caregivers are brought up in the body. And rather than, we're trying to anchor to something, this is where women will, anchor to, I need to be saved by man. Men will anchor to a woman that I need a mommy or something. I need a surrogate mother because I can't anchor my own sort of system. And so when this rupture happens, we usually try to find something to hold on to, whether it's substances or whether it's another relationship or whether it's distracting through dating habits or it's just being so hyper busy that we're usually in distraction of this reorientation that's happening. And it requires us to really be in the world on our own for a little while. And so what's happening here also is we are actually dealing with the core root of what created the core survival identity in your family of origin. So think about the identity of how does your family, consciously or unconsciously, view you? What's sort of the archetype? How did you learn to find worth and value and belonging so that you could fit into the family system without disrupting the family organism, right? As you're working with this attachment wiring, you're essentially smashing through the roof of this container. This is where the crown really opens. This is where the crown chakra really opens. And so you're beginning to process and access the deepest fear and terror of the pre-verbal attachment wiring in the body, which is the very root that allowed and kind of withheld your nervous system within the container of this core survival identity. Underfunctioner, overfunctioner, family therapist, maybe you were, a child who had to take on the role of an adult. Your childhood was taken away. You had to move into more of a role of caretaker. So much of that, it begins in the attachment in the womb, the pre-verbal memories, and then becomes fostered. It becomes fostered, right? It becomes further lamented and imprinted. And that's how we found worth and belonging. Now this attachment rupture, let's say a relationship that we really thought was going to work out, and that kind of is disrupted, right? That doesn't work out. Now what we're actually doing in our system is we're accessing the imprint that created the core survival identity in the family. We're accessing the root of it, right? And if we really begin to connect with God here and the truth of where we're really being guided and led, then we begin to unwind the nervous system from that core survival identity that we use to get certain needs met. And now we're actually beginning to heal that core survival identity. This is where you really actually begin to break up with your parents, where you break up with your family of origin, and where actually what happens is how you show up with your family of origin is actually the same way that you're interchanged with the world, right? So think about if you're someone who you engage in the world, right? But then you come back, say, to the family home, the family dinner, and then there's a big shift in how much you allow your expression. Maybe there's a big contraction. What that really means is that we haven't actually dealt with that big attachment rupture. When we really, really process the attachment rupture, it becomes more seamless with what we embody, the expression that we command in our space, and how we show up with the family of origin, right? How we show up with the family of origin. So really that means, say you're you're big in your expression and your power, and And that doesn't really change that much when you get around your parents, or that doesn't really change that much when you get around your siblings. So if there's a huge disconnect or a huge contraction, it means that we haven't really allowed this attachment rupture to really, really move through our space, right? And again, what's most common is when people begin to access the attachment rupture, that's usually when the most fear is coming up. We deviate back into what's familiar and we deviate back into the old patterns, right? This is why, for example, say we experience a breakup in a relationship, and then we keep going back to certain relationships and creating similar dynamics. We keep going back and creating similar dynamics because we haven't actually allowed the full volume of that attachment rupture to move through our body, to fully be healed, to be integrated, to be released through our body. And so what's happening here is you're accessing the greatest terror and fear that you've ever known, right? What's happening in that attachment rupture is you're having to feel the world and the universe in an entirely different way. You're actually having to feel the world through your own anchored energetic sovereignty. This is where it kicks up things like love addiction really, really strong, where we move really back into those codependent patterns because we're like, ooh, like I feel sort of what's happening. And the fear and terror sort of overwhelms us and overtakes us because we don't really understand what's happening, right? What's happening is we're processing this container here is we're beginning to smash through that. We're beginning to smash through that. This attachment rupture is really, really when we begin to access ancestral energy. This is really, really when the ancestors begin to go. Because what's happening as you're processing this attachment rupture in your body, now the face is opening, right? The face is opening. The face is beginning to integrate, realign with the radiance and the magnetism of God. As soon as it does, the third eye opens, the revelation of the path of the higher self. The path of the oracle becomes revealed. As the third eye opens, the crown begins to open. The crown opening means the ancestors are leaving. It means the ancestors are leaving. The crown opening in conjunction with the root, that means that the reorientation of God is happening in our body and system. When the root and the crown are really opening simultaneously, what this means is that we're reorienting to God in a way that is really viscerally of the earth, right? Really, really viscerally of the earth. But people don't usually understand this is happening, or they get deterred from this process, right? Again, this is why people so often, like, think about someone to be married for 20 years and they break up with someone for like 4, 5, 6 months and they're all of a sudden in another relationship. That person has not fully endured an attachment rupture. It's like when we experience a really big rupture, it's like we kind of, this is a great time to be celibate for a year, to really go through a detox with do no dating for a year. Do nothing that is absolutely of the cleanest energy for a year, right? Because this is where what happens is we break our internal boundaries. So much of love addiction and the inner love addict is where we break our internal boundaries out of fear, out of the ego's need for approval and validation. Because what's happening is the attachment rupture is happening. Now we're beginning to reorient our energy to the cleanliness of God, which means that the little hits of need for approval and validation, we're trying to wash that through a greater vibration up here. And so we're having to look at all the ways that we overstep our own internal boundaries, all the ways that without fully aligning to God, that we get deviated from that path and look for the little hit of approval and validation, right? That little hit of sort of assurance, that little hit where the little boy or the little girl kind of begins to hijack us and begins to govern us and lead our choices. And we allow people to move into our space. We can't enforce external boundaries. We can't uphold our own internal boundaries. And so a rupture is a replication of an early break in connection with the primary caregivers that is now being initiated and activated in the body, most often through a romantic rupture in a relationship, right? This is why it's almost always necessary to experience a very significant primary relationship attachment rupture in order to truly move into an orientation with God and the divine. This is why, we haven't really acclimatized to the divine if we've never really experienced a relationship we thought was going to be our everything and then had it not work out, or had the rug pulled out from under us, or had to experience a really significant break in connection, right? Because what this is doing, what this attachment rupture is doing, most people's spiritual sort of identification is coming from with the confines of an unhealed attachment system. Most people's, process of what it means to be a spiritually embodied being is coming from not having processed the deepest fear and terror from the womb in those pre-verbal years, right? And so now what's happening is we're actually not living in our true spiritual embodiment of the absolute divine God potential, which is really where we download the divine feminine code, we download the divine masculine code, right? Because always when the rupture happens, this is where the inner love addict is like we find something to hold on to. What we're essentially trying to do, you guys, is we're trying to find something to co-regulate our system. So when we deviate from this reorientation process with God and the divine, we're trying to find something to co-regulate the amount of fight or flight, the anxiety, the fear, the terror, the uncertainty, the unknown in our body. We're trying to find something to anchor that, which is why we start dating quickly, why we begin to initiate in the same patterns why we can't really move through this process, essentially why we continue to leak energy, right? Why we continue to allow people to invade our boundaries, and why we can't uphold our own boundaries, because the reorientation to God and the process of healing and attachment rupture, the word is energetic hygiene and energetic sovereignty. What that means is you have to restore the sovereignty of your container, right? Which means you have to be able to experience the world completely on your own for a little while. Completely on your own for a little while. If you actually allow yourself to move down that path, the ancestors begin to flee and leave all through your body, and the crown chakra begins to burst wide the fuck open. This is where you really move into the divine. Most people talk about spirituality and all this have never really experienced this attachment rupture. What it means is there's going to be a level of potency and profoundness in what moves through them that they're not accessing, right? There's going to be a level of ego. There's going to be a level of there's aspects to core fear and terror in the body that we have not moved and integrated. If you think about moving into the divine, our capacity to engulf and encompass and embody the divine and God is proportional to the amount of fear and terror we've had to integrate and alchemize in the body, which produces freedom, which produces unhinged freedom of expression, right? So, you guys, what happens when we don't endure the attachment rupture? All of a sudden, our expression is contracted. All of a sudden, the expansion of our vessel and who we are is contracted and limited because we have unconscious loyalties to the family of origin through the core survival identity that our body is holding on to, and we have unconscious loyalties to the ancestors. I don't want to piss off this sort of archetype and an ancestral organism that has been constructed, because our system hasn't broken through that, right? Our system hasn't broken free of it. The way we break free is alchemizing this pre-verbal attachment rupture all the way through our body so our face can open and realign to the vibration of God and source. Now the crown opens. This is where the energetic field expands so far, right? Where you don't have these contractions all through the energetic field, because what's happening is this attachment rupture, you're clearing the ancestral field, you're healing the earliest imprints of the father wound and the mother wound, the earliest imprints. And you're beginning to anchor and co-regulate your system with that of the higher self, the most free, liberated version of you. When you see in your mind's eye your higher self, what you're essentially imagining is the part of you, the channel within you that is free of the energetic imprint of the father wound, free of the energetic imprint of the mother wound, and free of the ancestral organism that has not allowed your crown chakra to fully open to the divine. This is why twin flames are useful. This is why karmic spiritual relationships are useful, because they're catalysts, right? They're catalysts that bring up not only pre-verbal attachment, but they bring up attachment from the spirit realm. This is why twin flames are trauma bonds in the spirit realm, right? What they're doing is they're bringing up some sort of past timeline attachment, right? So when we experience like a really karmic spiritual relationship or a really potent spiritual connection that we're like, this has to work, we're accessing an attachment from a past previous timeline for our soul's iteration. And so we're like, oh my God, this is my salvation. This is my deliverance. But what's actually happening is that attachment is from a different timeline, and that rupture is actually going to lead to us being able to retrieve all aspects of our soul through the embodied vessel here on earth. And when we experience a really big attachment rupture from a really potent spiritual connection, what's happening is we are actually looking at the ways that our spiritual ego wasn't truly in deliverance and connection to God and the divine, right? The ways that this spiritual ego, this inflated spiritual ego, and what's underneath that inflated spiritual ego is the deepest terror and fear of the body. And so when that sort of twin flame doesn't work, and what all those really powerful connections are here to do is to excavate, to bring everything to the surface. So now when you experience like a break in a connection that's a really powerful spiritual relationship, not only are you experiencing an attachment rupture from the spirit realm, you're experiencing the same pre-verbal attachment rupture from the womb and those first few years of your life. So it becomes this really big double whammy. And now what happens is this is where you move into a total orientation of God, where now your attachment system is totally constructing to God and the divine. And it feels like you've lost all spiritual meaning in your life. But what's actually happening is you're truly moving to total spiritual sovereignty, total energetic sovereignty in your body. This is where the energetic field completely opens in your body. It completely opens in your body. And think about how much we're fighting against this, right? How much that we don't understand that this is happening. This is why so much of the spiritual industry, really the embodiment of God that they preach is pre-attachment rupture, right? Is pre-attachment rupture, where we have to really endure a big break where we break up with our parents, where we break up with the ancestors of origin. When I say break up with our parents and break up with the ancestors of origin, I mean we have to shatter in our body and system the unconscious loyalties that our system hooks into with the ancestors and our family of origin, which means that we no longer play by the rules of the family organism or the ancestors of organism or the ancestors of origin, that we move into our own free vibration of our unique soul's expression. And we co-regulate with our higher self rather than the ancestors or our family of origin. Now what happens here is we can show up as our most expanded and liberated self in our family of origin and the ancestors of origin, because we've reoriented our imprint, right? And so when we really process the pre-verbal breaks in connection, now what's happening is the size of the container that we hold is so much more expansive because we don't have that fear confining us, right? Think about how much relationally prohibits you from living in the most infinite expansion of truth in that relationship. It all comes down to the container of fear that your unhealed attachment still holds in your body. That's a big one. When you think about why we can't move into this infinite expansion of total freedom of expression and power relationally, why we feel relationships have to come with a contraction to some degree, or why we hold back aspects of our truth, or why we feel we have to compromise large aspects of ourself, it comes down to the unhealed attachment system. It means the pre-verbal breaks in connection with our primary caregivers that still occupy the size of our container, right? So when those pre-verbal breaks in connection still run hold on the system, now what's going to happen is we're going to be enmeshed to that core survival identity that links us to the family of origin, and we're going to live within the confines of these unconscious loyalties to the ancestors of origin. We can't really be a divine being yet. We can't really move into our God codes. We can't really download the divine feminine code or the divine masculine code. Fear still runs greater than freedom. We don't know what true love is. Think about most relationships. It's a real merging between attachment and love, right? Think about true love is where the true choosing of someone is really coming from a deeply integrated attachment system within ourselves, where fear and fear around attachment has really been dialed down in the body so we can truly see someone without the confines and restraints of the attachment wounding still holding in the body, right? This is why when you reorient to God, you're shifting relationships from like codependent need to complete divine conscious choosing, right? Where you have fully liberated a spiritual experience within your body here on earth. And now you can make this real choice of discernment of who can help amplify this experience with me? Who can I move into collective mission with? And now you're able to see someone and vet someone clearly. And because you're able to choose from your own sort of clean, energetic hygiene. You're able to choose from your own sort of energetic sovereignty. You're not bleeding and stepping over your own internal boundaries from the inner love addict who's like, I can't be alone. The inner love addict who's like, I need approval. I need validation. I need to be saved by a man. I need to be saved by a woman. I need someone to take care of me. I need to take care of someone, whatever it is. And we've restored this sense of sovereignty and cleanliness in our own sort of energetic field, which what happens when we really, really do that? The fear really, really starts to move. The fear and the terror. And now all of a sudden, the possibility for your life shifts dramatically because the level of fear that your body was holding through the confines of that unhealed attachment trauma is beginning to integrate and dissolve. This is where the face really opens, the third eye really opens, and the crown really opens. And the crown really opens in connection with our really, really integrated root chakra. And so if you think about like a relationship attachment rupture, it's so connected to a familial attachment rupture and attachment rupture with the ancestors. Think about how those three all bleed together, you guys. You experience this really difficult primary romantic relationship attachment rupture, which is going to bring up aspects of the identity that you've held on to that correlate to the family of origin, how you found belonging and worth and love in that family of origin, to ask you to move the fear and terror in your body that essentially sort of held on to that identity. And now, as you allow it to move and you're beginning to live in your own energy, you're beginning to understand. You're understanding how you sabotage your ultimate power, how the inner love addict inside of you kind of get ramped up, how the codependent aspects of you still played so loud, why you continue to recreate these patterns and dynamics, whether with the same partner over and over or through different relationships. You hadn't allowed your body to reorient. You hadn't allowed your body to reorient. When I say an attachment rupture, what we're dealing with are two things: fear and tear. Fear and tear. It's basically how you consciously construct the world and your co-regulated sense of safety in it. And so when you experience this attachment rupture, you're dealing with all the deepest forms of core fear and tear that prohibited you and sabotaged you from truly healing your relationship to God and the universe, and truly being able to move into a sense of your own wholeness and sovereignty and heal the deepest aspects of your codependent little boy or little girl that weren't able to completely feel their own energy and feel like this self-sufficient, interdependent, sovereign, whole being in the world all on their own, right? Where you can restore that sense of energetic sovereignty so you no longer move into a space of needing something. You become your own savior. You become your own sovereign place. This is where relationship becomes more of a real sovereign choice of discernment, of you're choosing from a really embodied and integrated, expansive, energetic field, right? And most people never really allow themselves to get to this place. And it really requires us to allow the fear and terror to be processed in this rupture. And so this attachment rupture really creates a disruption in the family of origin, and it creates a disruption in the ancestors of origin. Because the ancestors really, really begin to be accessed when you're beginning to access your pre-verbal attachment in your body and being. Because think about it. You're working in your lifetime. When you start to deal with that lifetime, you're expanding infinitely beyond to other lifetimes. And so it's not like you can't access ancestral energy before this, but I would say that you really begin to clear the ancestral field with this attachment rupture, which creates a break in the rupture, a familial sort of rupture, and in your ancestors of origin. So this is about like breaking up with your parents, but more importantly, it's about breaking up with an identity that bonded you to the family of origin, right? And it's breaking up with some sort of an inherited identity in the ancestral field, in the ancestral realm. And when we have a really powerful spiritual connection, now we're accessing a attachment rupture or an attachment bonding in another timeline that we're accessing because we're meant to move into that much of an infinite ancient expansion here on earth, right? And this is why people get so like addicted to twin flames, and they're actually not really allowing the full volume of the divine embodiment to break through. They become limited in their spiritual embodiment because they don't understand what's happening. And so the spiritual ego is clinging on to this thing because they feel that they're losing connection to God with this relationship, when actually the break in that relationship is what truly initiates them to God. Now your field is able to expand infinitely wide open on your own sort of energetic space. And this is where you really move into a space of wholeness, sovereignty, preparing for sacred union. And so to break it down very simply, guys, this is about fear and terror in the body. And it's about fear and terror where you don't have a conscious memory, right? So when you experience an attachment rupture, you're experiencing a replication of the break in connection that you experienced when you were young. And you're actually having to heal and integrate the fear and terror that created the stored, stuck survival trauma in your body and system at that specific point of a break in connection that was probably exasperated over and over and over again. And as your body begins to integrate that fear and terror, now you're truly beginning to see yourself and connect and bond to yourself in a whole new way, where you can create the safety for the deepest, most vulnerable aspects of yourself to come to the surface. And you're able to co-regulate with the higher self, your most liberated, free self. This is where you begin to belong to God and the angels, right? This is where you can truly move onto the God timeline, where now you're able to heal those deepest aspects of you that led to you breaking your own internal boundaries and allowing people to overstep your external boundaries. This is really how you heal the inner love addict. It's all about that deepest attachment imprint and wiring and that fear and terror moving through our body. And it requires us to, outside of your core survival identity with the family and how you found belonging, worth, and love in the family, outside of the codependent relational patterns that you've been moving through, outside of the unconscious loyalties to the ancestors of lineage, where you can really feel the space is pretty open, where you really don't feel that you're kind of entitled to live in loyalty of these sort of unspoken ancestral sort of rules that's been passed down, right? You're able to break those. And you can feel in your energy on your own, which it's going to feel a little bit like isolation. It's going to be loneliness that's going to come up. It's going to feel confusion. It's going to feel like the crazy unknown, where when you experience an attachment rupture, it's kind of like how you thought life was supposed to be all of a sudden shifts. And you're like, whoa, I need to create a whole new timeline. I need to create a whole new timeline. So when we're on the precipice of experiencing a big rupture, what we're usually doing is we're holding on to some sort of ego's version of a spiritual timeline, right? Like, oh, things need to be this way, or I thought things were going to be this way, right? You kind of, every part of you kind of locked into that, like this timeline. And then now what happens, and your body fights against it, because all of a sudden everything, the ego, which is the desperate part of you, the desperate fear-driven part of you, the part of you that is fear and terrified, is holding on to this timeline, because a disruption to that timeline that you're holding on to is going to create where, whoa, like, I don't know where to go anymore. Like, things that I thought were true are no longer true. And now I'm having to move into a total recreation at such a deep, profound level. And it's really disorienting for your system. You're like, how I thought things were going to be are no longer that. And so now you feel like you all of a sudden have this blank canvas where you had sort of connected the dots and it had made sense, and your ego had begun to identify with that. That gets disrupted. And now it's like you had a wardrobe that no longer fits you anymore. And you're like, oh shit, I don't have any clothes. Like, I got to design a whole new wardrobe. And we fight against this. Like, think about how many people are in real powerful twin flame connections where they're like, this is it. Like, this has to be it. And the ego fights against it. But we often need an experience like this, which truly puts us onto the God timeline. And now as that ego is shattered, we realize that there was a deeper truth that our body hadn't fully accessed yet. A deeper truth that our body hadn't fully accessed yet. And so we thought it was the end of God, but it's actually the beginning of God. It's actually the beginning of everything that we didn't know that we needed. This is where the heroine and hero's journey really, really begins, where you're really beginning to align with God all through your body. This is where the embodiment of God becomes a fully encompassed head to toe experience, not just like a part. When you think of someone's got powerful intuition, this is where your intuition speaks in your cells from head to toe. It's a fully embodied channel of psychic, godly intuition. But that break, that ego death, that timeline where everything gets removed is the same as an attachment rupture. It's a spiritual version of the break in connection in the pre-verbal years. It's a smashing of that container that confined you, that still kept fear really, really loud, right? And it's how we fought against truth in our life and our body. And So it's really confusing when that all of a sudden gets washed away and you're like, I don't know where to go next. Like I don't know where I'm being called. It's like a real open canvas, infinite space of the unknown. Most people never really allow themselves to get to this point, right? They may experience a little shade of it, right? But they, continue to like live in the same old identity. They find another relationship really, really quickly. They're dating right away. They're entertaining connections right away, rather than allowing the unwinding and the unfolding and this rupture to happen, which is a reorchestration, which is really, really where you're learning to interchange with the universe in a whole new way. And you're beginning to access aspects of your power that you have never accessed before. Now, this is where you begin to walk the path of the oracle, right? Where you're really learning into interchange with the universe and God and the divine in a whole new way. And so this rupture in some form, familial, ancestral, primary romantic relationship, they're usually all interconnected. That's the same thing. And it usually takes a pretty significant relationship, attachment rupture of some variety for the body to access this stuff. And then when it does, we're usually accessing a lot of that from the family of origin and the ancestors of origin. They kind of all move together, right? And as you do that, you're so disoriented because you're having to find a whole new way of interchanging with the universe. But this is where you heal that trauma from the womb, that pre-verbal trauma where you were crying all on your own, you were terrified. That's what your body's beginning to access and move through so that you can feel totally safe and anchored in the world and the universe all on your own without having to attach and co-regulate. This is why people put hooks into people. This is why when you think about why like a guy hooks into me, it's because he's fighting against this. His ego, his little boy is fight. We hook into people because we're afraid to fully feel our own energy in the world. We're afraid because this is going to bring up the earliest attachment trauma in our body. And so this is why we always hook into people, why energy doesn't feel clean, why the inner love addict begins to prevail. We're hooking into people because we fear what will come up if we bring everything back to ourselves. And now all the ways the ego sought approval and validation, it comes up. It becomes revealed to us. We're like, oh shit, I see this in a whole different way. This is also where you begin to finally access our power. And you begin to finally see very clearly the ways that you sabotage your greatest power through codependent relationship patterns, why you couldn't be your most powerful in relationships, why when you're around your parents, you always turned into a little boy or little girl, why you felt like you had to appease your grandparents and your great-grandparents, and you couldn't fuck shit up in the way that your body wanted to. And so now our attachment system begins to align to God and the angels. It shifts from our primary caregivers to that of God and the angels. This is where the crown fully opens. This is where the ancestors truly fully leave our body. We can access ancestral energy before, but when this rupture happens, this is when the ancestors fully leave our body. And now, rather than bonding to mom and dad, we bond to the higher self. That the way that we anchor, the way that we co-regulate is through the embodiment of the higher self in our space. And now we can be in this infinite expansion space of the unknown, and we can be totally anchored. We can feel totally safe and sovereign in our space, and we can hold fort in some of the loneliness. This is where we're truly learning what true love is. This is where we're truly learning what true love is. Where attachment, fear, freedom, love, expansion is all beginning to counter shift in the body. And this is where God really begins to open. And this is where the divine really begins. And this is where our true head-to-toe relationship with full integrity of God really begins. This is why attachment ruptures are almost always necessary in some capacity. Breaking up with your ancestors, breaking up with your parents, and breaking up with some codependent identity version in romantic relationships. this is where we move into our total power, and this is where the divine starts to move all around us. Robin W., but also sometimes face expressions are fawning. I learned fake smile from my family of origin, fake facial expression in general. Totally. It's where we just establish a mask in some way, where we just can't truly reveal the true authentic expression. So if you think about where does your relationship to your self-expression begin, it begins in the womb in those first 3 years, and learning whatever you were as a baby, could that exist on your face? And so when you are moving through this attachment rupture in the facial nerves, in your throat chakra, in your heart chakra, your inner ear, you're accessing all stuck, stored trauma that didn't allow truth to be revealed on your face. So attachment rupture is so much about allowing the truth to come out of your throat and the truth to be revealed on your space, and the truth of the path that you're truly meant to walk down to be revealed, and the truth of the godly power that you're truly meant to hold and execute here on earth can finally be revealed. So everyone, that's it for this YouTube Live, Attachment Ruptures. If you aren't subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe. Please like this video. Share it with your friends if you feel there's anything that might resonate with them. Comment and let me know what connected with you guys in this piece. Whatever nuggets, whatever sort of little chords and threads that you pulled out that were meaningful to you, let me know in the comment section. And sending a lot of love to everyone and wishing you guys a great week. And we'll see you guys on Friday in the next YouTube Live. Gang, gang, DeLong, everyone. Happy Labor Day. Jamie Rea, over and out.